freeze,
What's that?
air,
No freeze, I think so.
it's like being in a meeting.
Cool, yeah. It's cool. All right, folks, I'm rarely an answer to prayer, so I don't know quite how to take that, to say the least. Might be something else, so, but I appreciate that. It's good to be back. Let's see, we are, because I was asked specifically, and to keep the whole restoration millennial thing going, we're going to talk about the Seventh-day Adventists. My lecture with them is usually not as long as the others, but that doesn't mean I'm going to give you the whole thing either. And obviously, just like we've done before, anytime you have a question, I'd much rather have that than me spouting up here. So off we go. And I will tell you contextually, I was a little enthused about this. The recent movie Mel Gibson directed, I don't know how crazy you are about Mel Gibson anymore, but Hacksaw Ridge, I don't know if any of you have seen it or not, you may know the story. Based on the true story of Desmond Doss. Okinawa, May 1945. Doss had a family that had always committed to military service. He joined as well, joined the Army, but he was an avowed conscientious objector. But his definition of CO status was not to carry a weapon. And so he supposedly talked to the office at the time, the story goes, I think he was working in the shipyard. He's from Virginia. And he's Seventh-day Adventist. And he made very clear what he wanted to do, and supposedly the Army, the folks said, yeah, come on, we'll acknowledge that you have to go through basic and then get you ready. Well, the conflict arose for him at basic because part of the basic was rifle training. And the first day he was presented, according to the movie, who knows, I got to dig in and find out if all this really happened. But he was presented with the rifle and he said, I can't touch it, I can't do it. The sergeant, the sergeant had not been informed of the arrangement, certainly, and neither had the captain, and neither had the colonel on base. I think it was Fort Jackson. I don't know if that rings a bell with anybody at the time, but Fort Jackson, if I'm not mistaken. And the movie depicts his trials and tribulations, sort of proving his worth. And then he always wanted to be a medic. He got very interested. He became a medic after a general that had served with his father in World War I intervened and said, referred to a congressional act. And if I'm not mistaken, 40 or 41, there was an act as a result of a Supreme Court decision that granted CO status to, we talked about the witnesses. Remember we talked about the Jehovah's Witnesses? They fought for 21, 22 years, beginning in 1917, 18, to attain CO status. And Congress acknowledged objector status for a variety of different religious groups. But his version was quite unusual. I mean, some people say, I'm not going to serve at all. But he said, I want to serve, I just want to be a medic. So blah, blah, blah. Desmond Doss, Hacksaw Ridge was, if it's depicted in the movie like it was about a sheer cliff of 100 feet. And we had, near the end of World War II, of course, well, the previous day to his unit going up, 3 battalions had been lost. 3 of our battalions. That's the word they used, have been lost. He gets up there in a firefight, and Doss, while they all retreated back down this huge rope ladder, the way it's depicted, he stayed on Hacksaw Ridge under the cover of darkness and went out into the field and drug wounded soldiers back, and he had rigged a large rope with sort of a bow, and so he did the legs through there, tied the knot, and then lowered them down. Of course, it shows his bloody hands after about the 12th one. He saved 75 soldiers, wounded soldiers, and won. He was the only CO in World War II to win the Congressional Medal of Honor. for his actions. So it is a very uplifting film in some ways. I need to warn you, it is a Mel Gibson R-rated,
Shoot.
yeah, and I'm sure it's an extraordinarily accurate, and you can't even begin to get accurate about what did happen in those kind of battle scenes, but it would not be for everybody. You know, I can watch most anything and I'm okay, but it is graphic. So this is not the story. Maybe look up the story of Desmond Doss and go from there. That's very interesting. So he was Seventh-day Adventist, and I said, well, I was thinking about doing that anyhow, so I'll talk about Doss, and then off we go. Let's see, the 1800s again. We're up in Vermont, New England again. Like everything in the 1800s came out of Vermont, New York, all that, New Hampshire, all that area right there. It's just of course, it was the frontier. You know, a lot of people always have to remind me that people had landed and then they'd moved west. And
Tie that to the Great Awakening.
Frontier.
What year was the Great Awakening up there?
Well, Great Awakening, 1730s, 30s and 40s with Jonathan Edwards.
So about 100 years prior.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people say the newness of the nation also tied in with the newness of religious movements, you know, fervor about, and there was already rebellion against the Puritan structure, the Congregationalist structure. It was already time to, you know, we Protestants are really good at protesting, so let's go protest again, you know, after that. And so you had the Joseph Smiths of the world, and I haven't talked about Mary Baker Eddy, who came a lot later, but she's certainly a form of protest with Christian Science. And then you have this gentleman, William Miller. Miller had really very little religious or church background. Everybody farmed. When you say somebody farms in 1816 and 1820, it's about the dumbest thing you can say. I'm talking about me, because like, who didn't farm? Everybody did some farming. But he had pursued some journalistic endeavors. He was very interested in newspapers. He was a writer even early for the Vermont Telegraph, which was a state paper, I think, at the time. Well, he finally found himself in a church, and of course, he was a Baptist. He got converted in a Baptist church in 1816. It's another, you know, we can get them, we just can't keep them story kind of thing. And he got, in his own words at times, he got just enamored with the Scripture. To his credit, he said, if I'm going to do this, what I understand in Scripture, I'm going to know this Scripture for myself. So how do I make a long story short? Next 2 years, intense study, and by 1818, he had decided two things. The first, he had decided that Jesus would return to earth in a physical sense, in a second coming. It would be bodily. Everybody would see it, and it would be pre-millennial. It would be before the kingdom is established. Now, I know when I say that right now, some of you may say, well, is there any other way? Well, the theology of the time, the overbearing theology of the time, Edwards, the establishment of the American kingdom kind of idea, was post-millennial. Many people in the American church in the 1700s and the early 1800s believed that we were the ones who would bring in the kingdom. That God had finally found, for lack of a better phrase, a new Israel. And we would bring in the kingdom, get the throne established, get the kingdom established, and Jesus would come, but Jesus would be ushered almost with palm leaves, frankly, into the throne forever. And Miller said, no, it's going to be pre-millennial. All that's great. But he also said that all that would happen between March 1843 and March of 1844.
That's where he went wrong.
That's where he went wrong. Now, he was immediately, he didn't go on the road and start preaching this. He stayed in Vermont. He worked on the paper. He did his farming, kept studying the Scripture. He did some lecturing, usually on Revelation with a capital R. And he did that for, 15, 18 years. Just stayed in that area. Fairly renowned regionally as a scholar, I'll explain that in a second, of the Scriptures. He got faced with that issue all the time. Oh, don't you have you read No One Knows the Day or the Hour? And he said, I didn't choose a day or an hour. He went to Daniel, went to Ezekiel, went to Revelation, went here, went there, went everybody tries to predict, folks always goes to those places, you know that, Thessalonian, the same usual suspect. And he said, I see this is what's going to happen, because one of those scriptures, and y'all have to help me here, but one of them says, no one knows the age of the hour. There's some kind of phrase that says, but the righteous or the faithful or something can understand the signs of the times kind of motif. So he stuck to his guns, and he finally wrote a book in 1837, Evidence from Scripture and History on the Second Coming of Christ, about 1843. Long title, but pretty cool. Now, I often compare it to 6 years before, so if I picked up a book, if I went to a bookstore and saw a book, Jesus Coming in 2022, I'm tell you, I would not pick it up, I would not get it, I would not purchase it, would not read it. But, as I've often told my young students at U of L, they didn't have Nintendo then, they didn't have an iPhone, they didn't have cable. They had one thing they could do for entertainment, and that was read a book. I guess they could play cards, and play dominoes, and do a few other things, but if they really wanted to try to learn something, they had to read a book. And most of the things written were religious. Y'all know that's where the money was in terms of publishing. So most religious ideas, we talked about that with Joseph Smith. Almost anything could get published. He got published. It was well received. The book reflected Miller. Anytime you ever read descriptions of Miller, it's logical, scientific, quiet, unassuming, humble, a lot, but fiercely devoted to his sort of scholarly, mathematical approach to how this was going to play out, and for him, very faithful approach. My little deal about a second person, he actually had this person come along in his life. He wasn't all interested in marketing, but a guy in Boston read his book and said, there's a great market here for this. Hiram Edson, I think his name was. I think it's Edson. I think that's right. So he said, you got to come to Boston. You got to come to Boston. Boston's a religious capital, intellectual capital, university capital. Let's see if it plays here. So in the next 5 years, they bought 2 newspapers. One of them was called Signs of the Times. That was in Boston. The Midnight Cry was in New York. I love that, the Midnight Cry. And they were holding meetings all over. Full disclosure, I like Miller quite a bit. I mean, I know it sounds maybe like I don't, but I like him because of how he's described always. And I like this. As he was holding meetings, he encouraged his followers, and of course they were Millerites, not Miller Lights, Millerites. There you go. They were Millerites, of course. He encouraged them to form associations. Now, some of you, or societies. He loved the word societies, and you all know there were missionary societies at the time. There were Bible societies, and they were wonderful, usually ecumenical efforts. People just sent in money to print Bibles. What a deal! So, or send in money to a mission organization to send out a missionary. And he said, I want you to do the same thing. Don't leave your Methodist church or your blank church, whatever. Stay there and tell them about this. It's important. They get a tent. Anybody, I know this is a dumb question. I asked people at U of L, and it's been like 6 years since I had a student say they'd actually been to a tent revival. I'm assuming more hands would go up if I've asked if you've been to a tent meeting. Okay. Some evangelists of the 1950s had tents that would hold 18,000, 20,000 people. His supposedly held 3,000. And the reason they got a tent is he was starting to draw such crowds, and there weren't many young centers in 1839. In fact, there weren't many buildings this size in 1839. So they got a tent that supposedly held 3,000, and people were flocking to this message to hear it. And y'all if you've been to a tent meeting, you know it's just something amazing to me. I mean, they are a great part of religious action. Americana in some ways. I just always loved it, man. Of course, you got to go in late July when it's 105 outside and 145 in the tent. That makes that hell preaching a little more real, I think.
They had one here on this property back in twenties, I think that's when the building was.
Right here?
You know?
Yeah. Really?
You're right here in the back. of the-
Ah.
Mordecai Ham.
Yeah.
You know, he was the founding preacher here. Did you not know that?
No.
Yeah, I can take you
We
to
are
his house
famous.
right over here. We are Hamites.
Wow.
He also baptized
Wow.
my grandmother in the Ohio River. That took an act of faith on her part. She
Yeah.
did not like mortar above her ankles.
We're talking about, I can't believe I haven't told you about
Hamsters.
Mordecai Ham.
Hamsters.
You hear that? I gotta give him props for that. He said we'd be hamsters.
We were the first Hamlet.
Yeah. The first Hamlet. Oh, it's coming hot and heavy. Tent. The big tent. But he stayed with the message. He stayed with his message. You know, I don't want to start a church. I don't want to do anything. 1843 rolls around, folks, and I always tell my students, here I go again, comparing it to now. You know, we know if something happens on the other side of the world literally in 30 seconds now. It's a stunning kind of knowledge that we have in terms of information. They did not, clearly, but they had ways to find out things around the world in 3 weeks, 4 weeks later. It might be published, it might be a variety of things. And they started to read what I guess you could have read any month. You know, people have a notion that before Jesus comes back, it could get rough. I'm not sure I've ever bought into that. I think things may just be wonderful and then Jesus surprises us, but that's just me talking. But a lot of people have the idea that it's oh, this is terrible, this is terrible, this is terrible, and then here comes Jesus with a big trumpet riding a big horse. So they heard about earthquakes, and they heard about typhoons, and they heard about this, and heard about that, and that made a lot of his followers say, well, maybe he's on to something. And then this one, to me, is more influential. Some of you are probably economic historians in some respects. I only have enough knowledge to be, again, extraordinarily dangerous with economic history. But there have been about 5 genuine panics in the American economy. And 1843 is one of them, where the structures of the economy were endangered. Some people say 1876 was. Some argue 29, although I think, frankly, 31, 32 was worse than 29. So you get into a lot of those kind of things. But 1843 is usually acknowledged as a time of genuine economic panic. So it almost seemed like, okay, great. I mean, this guy's right. So it's going to be between March of 1843 and March of 1844, and April 1st, 1844 was the first great disappointment for Miller and his followers. And I always pause right there and I look at the students and I'd say I would give my left pinky if I could tell you that's where we get April Fools from. But unfortunately it's not. Of course, April Fools started maybe 2,000 years ago, either with the Romans or the Druids. It may have started before that, who knows, but the whole spring is sprung, people acting crazy. So I'd love to tell you that this is where we get April Fools, but I can't. So Miller, and this I say I like him, but he really fouled up here. He got together with a group, a very tight group. They went into seclusion for about 3 days, is the story, and came out very enthusiastically and said, you know, I messed up. I'm about 6 months off. It's going to be October 22nd, 1844. So October 23rd was the second great disappointment for Miller and his followers. I'm going to stop right there and tell you one other thing about popular media right now. And I'm not recommending this show either. Again, it's stunning, all the things I watch. HBO has a series called The Leftovers. I don't know if any of you have ever heard of it or seen it. I do not recommend it. Again, it would be inappropriate to recommend that show in a church, but I have watched it. Why did I watch it? Because the first show, the first season, 2% of the world's population disappears. That's their plot base. A kind of rapture. They call it The Departing. So season 1 dealt with that stuff. Season 2 dealt with 4 years later at a place they thought had been spared the departure. They called it Miracle, Texas. I could have told them that plot had holes in it because there are no miracles in Texas, but that's okay. We'll go back. And then This season started this weekend, and it's 3 years later. They're still in Texas, but something's going to take them to Australia. I've read about what happened, but here's why I bring it up. The first 6 or 7 minutes of the episode, completely quiet, no dialogue. They show a village, looks like a village from the 1800s, about 7 buildings, church right in the middle. And they go into the church at one point, and there's a preacher up there with a chalkboard using chalk, mathematical calculations, and the first date is something, January in this storytelling, 1844. So they haven't been overtly spiritual, religious, church, anything else. And for 6 minutes, they actually showed he erased the date twice. You with me? It went back into the church thing. And I was thinking, I'm sitting there thinking, how could anybody watching this know what in the world is going on? I mean, they were making a play for the Miller situation in their own terminology. Now, where they go with this, I don't know. It could be crazy where they go with it, but be that as it may. Now I'm back.
I got a question while you're there.
Yeah.
So was Miller's one of the mathematical computations? Was that how he came to his answer?
That's what he said. He went to, of course, the 70 times 7 references, and he did everything you've ever seen, folks. Some people have compared. You remember Hal Lindsey from maybe 30, 40, 50 years ago? Late great Planet Earth. Yeah. I guess in a modern day, LaHaye, Tim LaHaye, the Left Behind series, with some of that, but there have been, almost every generation has a popularizer, I think, of mathematics related to the scripture, trying to find
that's for the young earthers.
sort of the secret code. Yeah.
They added up, there's 6,000 years in the Bible.
Usher, was Archbishop Usher did some
And
of that.
C.I. Schofield.
Yeah.
And then this answers in this Ken Ham answers in Genesis.
Yep.
You know, the earth is 6,000 years old because we added up how long it's been since Jim. And so these mathematical computations, you're right, they tend to pop up in every generation.
Yeah. With either new teaching or new insight in theory, but it's pretty much the same old story that they, and it's always, and I don't mean to be, I'm not being funny, it's always Ezekiel, Daniel, sometimes Isaiah, Revelation, Thessalonians. There's one other one. There's one other one in the Jewish scriptures, in the Hebrew Bible. If I think of it, I'd say, but it's always there. You know that it's always there when they come up with it. So, again, here we go again. It'd be a fair question to say, wait a minute, we have Adventist churches. And he hadn't used the word Adventist yet. And I said, no. And you might be thinking, so the big prediction was twice fouled up, and these people stayed with it? And they said, yeah. And remember, what they always like to do is have meetings. They were very good at meetings. And they had another meeting in Albany, New York in 1845. I've always believed there's a dissertation just on 1845 ready for somebody. Because there's a lot of wild and woolly stuff happened in 1845. Church-wise, American religion-wise. And they met in Albany, and the group split very quickly. One group, thank goodness they were small, they said, no problem. We'll figure it out. Let's just do the math again and we'll figure it out. Biggest group said, no. But let's talk about Jesus coming back. We've gotten people excited. We believe it's going to happen. Let's prepare people. Let's be the messengers, if you will, that this is going to happen soon. We don't know when, but we think it's going to happen soon. So that group won, and Adventism pretty much started 1845. Miller died 1849, and he had never been the same after 1844. Broken, and I mean spiritually and psychologically broken. Not a mess, but just never was the same at all, because he really couldn't let go of the notion that he thought he had it. And nobody's ever questioned his faithfulness; they just question his methodology, I think, more than anything else. Okay, jumping ahead. It took a while before they were called Seventh-day Adventists, but they formed that church in 1863. I think the General Conference of the Seventh-day Adventist Community. So people say, you might not say, but I'll tell you, I'll ask for you. What happened in those 18 years? Well, a bunch. The Adventists were excited about Jesus coming back. Really excited. And they wanted to stay with that message, but I guess to their credit, they felt like if they're going to hang on to Miller and hang on to some of the thought, and hang on to the emphasis of the second coming, how do we explain what did not happen? Does that make sense? And of course, folks, they sort of did what all groups do, which is one of the great convenient answers of all time. Hey, something big happened, we just didn't see it. I've told you, the witnesses had, Jesus and Satan had a WWE cage match kind of thing in the heavens. That's sort of what they say, 1914. WWE's on my mind because they were downtown. They were actually at the Yum Center. Bernie Sanders at the Louisville Palace, and WWE was at the Yum Center. I got out of downtown early yesterday. I didn't want to be part of either one of those. So,
Perfect world.
yeah, perfect work. Yeah, got to U of L. Yeah. So they want to try to deal with it. And I won't do this for you, I promise. But here, I go to the board. I say, here's how they started to deal with it. Okay. The first theory they had, I was drawing Earth, and I draw a little door up in the sky, a little door. And they always say, what's the door for? I said, it's the door of salvation. Revelation 3:20, behold, I stand at the door and knock. What do you mean, what's the door for? It's the door. Jesus is coming, you know. Here he comes. He gets to the door. He opens the door. He looks through. And who does he see down here on earth? He sees Miller's folks. Right? This is the first permutation of this theory. He sees the Millerites. What are they doing? They're trying to get as many ready as possible. Because, you know, when he comes, it's sheep and goat time. Right? It's goat time. So he looks and he is aware of what's going on, and he says, I think I'll wait. Great explanation. Right? That's a great explanation. Let them work a little bit, bring more people in and everything else. Well, that theory, folks, held for a few years as they were sort of playing around. And then it changed, and it changed in a magical fashion, I gotta tell you. Just magical. Same earth, same door. The theory evolved. Jesus gets to the door, and the door is shut on Jesus in the new theory. I always say, people, and I've had a student ask, thank God, in 30 years, wait. Couldn't Jesus just sort of kick the door in? And I always say, he's a gentleman, he didn't want to kick the door in, leave me alone, you know, kind of thing. This is their theory, it's not my theory. Shut door theory. Jesus, the door is shut on Jesus. And what's this theory called? The shut door theory, for all time. Well, what do you mean the door is shut on Jesus? Here we go. Jesus gets here, the door cannot be opened. The Millerites are down here. The Adventists are down here and they're working, but Jesus cannot come because the church had abandoned the Sabbath. How about that?
Now, was Miller big on Sabbath?
No. Miller himself was not. Hardly ever said anything about the Sabbath. But it was a even better, stronger explanation to Miller's followers and the Adventists that there had to be a reason, because they were convinced they were right. This was the time. This was the era. The church had royally fouled up. And folks, when I say church, I mean like church. And of course, what do you mean? We just did the Sabbath thing, and I know it's that way, but what do you mean? And they said the true Sabbath never should have been abandoned by the Christian community. It should have been sundown Friday to sundown Saturday. Once they made that decision, this should not surprise you. Shut Door Baptist had been around in New England since like 1815. Do you know that? It was a
No.
group of Baptists, and they called themselves Shut Door Baptists, which is a compelling kind of name for some Baptists, I guess. But, I'd rather have Open Door Baptists. And then you get to No Walls Baptists. How about
Yeah,
that?
there you go.
There you go. So this was, for them, it was perfect. It was a perfect explanation. So they all decided, as part of their development then in 1863, that if we return to the true Sabbath and take it seriously, let's take it very seriously, then not only do we emphasize the second coming, but the world and the church would be prepared for the appropriate return to then establish the kingdom. Now, folks, there's many explanations about the Sabbath, and Jim, I know you've dealt with this probably more your area than mine, but there was logical reasons. I mean, the whole weekly celebration of the great getting up morning, as they say in many black churches. I mean, if Jesus got up on Sunday, then let's celebrate that every Sunday. So that's one. The other is many times they just wanted to avoid the yah-yah with the folks in the synagogue that were still going on the Sabbath, because there would have been a kind of overt tension. It goes on and on. There's probably 5 or 6 different reasons that the church said, let's just go to Sunday. So this was a perfect answer for them. They get to 1863, they form their church. Now, where do they form? I told you about Vermont and New England kind of thing. They're all in the north, folks, and I explain that real quick because I think this is to their credit. To a person almost in their organization, they were ferocious abolitionists. Ferocious abolitionists. Unremitting, unrepentant, just almost mean abolitionists. They defined themselves by who they were. So it's no accident that they experienced absolutely no growth in the South for a long time. I just told you about Desmond Doss, who was in Virginia in the 1940s. It took probably, I don't want to exaggerate this too much, probably 40 or 50 years before Adventists made their way much into the South. They finally did to some extent. But, and this I think is significant, and I'll return to this in a minute, when they moved, just like all folks moved, when they moved, they stayed north. They went into the Great Lakes area. To this day, I'm getting way ahead here, but I'll go ahead and do it. To this day, there's a pretty strong community in Wisconsin, Minnesota, the Dakotas, and it's almost like they loop. And there's a strong community of Seventh-day Adventists in California. Particularly in that, y'all help me, what's the big San something valley where everything grows?
San Fernando.
San Fernando Valley, thank you. San Fernando Valley, they're very strong there, more on that later, for a reason, actually. We'll come back to that. But there's a strong community still there. Okay, where were we? What else? Abolitionists. This is really neither here nor there, but they start to develop a real feel for the United States. They pretty much teach, I think it's Revelation 13, again, y'all have to help me here, but there's a 2-horned beast that arises in Revelation 13, and I think that beast helps the good beast, the good effort, and they say that's the U.S., church and state, that beast is the United States. So they talk about that a lot. End time, judgment, where are we, etc. Some of you I'm sure know this. They're very graphic about the great white throne judgment. We all will stand before the great white throne. They take it seriously, and I would say almost literally, because some of you know the throne clearly says that the book had, remember the Mormon discussion about why they keep the baptism of the dead, that may be the book of life, etc., etc. Well, they take that whole, is your name written in the book, ferociously, and they take very seriously the notion that your life is evaluated at that point, at the great white throne. And I think you would agree, we come up with certain theological discussions. Hey, Jesus took care of my book. I mean, sort of. They say that too, but they say everybody will be judged at the great white throne. the righteous will live, and the wicked will be annihilated. They don't do hell. I remember this when I did talk about Russell, and he had been to some Adventists and read some Adventist stuff, and he didn't like hell at all. But he actually sort of held out the notion maybe it was temporary. Well, the reason he didn't like hell is the Adventists said, no, we don't like hell. You're going to get annihilated. If you're in bad shape, if you've done bad, if you've lived badly, you'll be annihilated. The other thing, folks, they believe in a soul sleep. And this is why you are raised to judgment. Good, bad, or indifferent, everybody's going to be raised to judgment. They literally believe in soul sleep. They do not buy that when somebody passes, they are immediately in the presence of the Lord. And I know that up close and personal because I did a funeral about 38 years ago and I knew nothing with a Seventh-day Adventist preacher in Oklahoma. And he looked at me right before the service because I was going to pray twice. And he said, son, don't pray into heaven. We don't believe that. And I said, you don't believe that? Yeah. And I said, well, I think I'll pray like I need to. And he was fine. He didn't slap me or anything. But he said, we don't believe that. And they don't. Now, people say, well, where in the world they get that? Well, a little place called Thessalonians. What do you mean? Dead in Christ will rise first. And we really grapple with that, folks. It gets tough because the question is, oh, wait, dead in Christ? What do you mean they'll rise first? I thought they were there. Now, where do we go? We go to the thief on the cross, right? Jesus promised today you'll be with me in paradise.
Today you'll be in paradise.
Yeah.
Today,
not tomorrow, today. You'll be with me in paradise. So, that one's hard to get past, but they somehow get past it.
But don't believe Jesus.
Well, they do some gymnastics with the Greek in that line, and it's not the best they can do, but they sort of play with that and try to explain it in their methodology.
Can I add something right here?
Sure.
And I could be very wrong. Did not Jesus though say, I don't even know when my Father's going to send me back?
Oh yeah, no, he did.
Absolutely. All the answers are right there.
Right.
If you look for them.
Right,
If you read
absolutely. Yeah,
So how do they miss all
he
that?
does.
How do all these people miss all that?
Well, they again,
But I mean,
he
they
doesn't know,
intention.
and so they acknowledge, the good ones that even predict anything, they acknowledge that they don't know either, but because they go to the day and the hour line, that's the big one. No one knows the day or the hour. But there are a few scriptures that indicate if you really pay attention and you see certain things, and of course if you get in Mark 13, the little apocalypse, and what in the world is the abomination of desolation, I have some ideas, but I won't say them here. But anyhow, how do you know the abomination of desolation? Who in the world, what in the world is that? Well, who knows? You got to read it in context of the year 70, that's for sure, or right before that. So if people want to play with that and try to interpret certain things, as long as they don't say, he's coming Friday at 10:13 in the morning. I mean, I think that's where they say if you go that far, then you really are in the face of Jesus' own line. No one knows the day or the hour. But other people are very comfortable. This thing it never goes away. The radio preacher out of Oakland, who's weirdly, his last name was Hunting, I don't know if you remember this guy, he was an old radio preacher, and I don't know how he got this national following, but he said the world was going to end in May of 11. Of course, we had the whole Mayan thing, come up was that 2012? I may have told you all that context. I'm listed at U of L as, quote, an expert for some of these things, and I got one day, at least I'll do the same story, one day in like late April, early May of 2012, I got 3 calls from 3 different TV stations and appeared on all 3 within an hour and a half that evening. And I told them all the same thing. They said, what about this Mayan thing? The world's going to end. And because it was based on 2 or 3 chiseled rocks, everything else. And I said, you don't suppose just because they ran out of rock, do you? That the calendar might have, fouled up a little bit. And I don't think they wanted that answer, but I said, they asked me, they literally said, you think the world's going to end? No, I don't think the world's going to end. I said, you know, I tell you what, if I thought it was going to end around December, I think that was the spin. December 21st, wasn't it, 2012?
I think so.
Yeah. I told my class, I said, don't even think about buying a Christmas present for anybody. If it's going to end December 21st, 2012, I'll wait till the 22nd and go to the store. So, I don't know, if they're right, I ain't going to be holding 10 Christmas presents, you know, that I bought. That's crazy. So, Vernon.
Jim, how are they in missionary movement in other countries?
They are mission-minded. I don't think particularly successful because of some of the restrictions they have. One is the Sabbath. Well, let's go ahead and talk about the Sabbath. They take it very, very seriously. For the Sabbath for them is no work at all, sundown Friday to sundown Saturday. And beyond no work, it is you pretty much lock in with family. And you don't pursue a variety of things. There have been about 4 high school basketball players in the last 20 years here in Louisville that got some press because they couldn't play on Friday nights. They're Seventh-day Adventists. They were restricted to win Friday night. So there were a couple of schools that bent over backward to change their schedule because they were pretty good players. They wanted them to play. So they tried to change the schedule to get a lot of Thursday night things, Wednesday night things, or earlier on Friday before the sun went down. So they take the Sabbath very seriously with restrictions. That might play in some parts of the world related to some people's understanding of Sabbath, but then when you mix in a variety of other things, including some dietary restrictions that we haven't talked about yet, they are not necessarily well received. In general, I mean, people don't find the Seventh-day Adventists to be just goofy people, though. I mean, they're very devout, wonderful people. They're interested in good works. They really are interested in bringing as many people as possible and telling them about the end time. Do y'all ever? I don't get it as much anymore, but about once a year, like clockwork, I could count on a huge envelope to come to the house, and I'd pull it out, and there would be a 3-night lecture from somebody that was coming into town. And one of the lectures was always, what does America have to do with the end time? And it was like a 4-color, multifold brochure. If you read in the fine print, that was always from this church right up here, Seventh-day Adventist Church.
My younger kids went to daycare up here.
Yeah.
It was wonderful.
Wonderful.
Great people.
Yeah, just fantastic people. In general, I mean, they really do have a reputation of just being wonderful people. Back to keep talking about the movie Desmond Doss, back to the Sabbath. He also would form the army that Saturday was his Sabbath, and that went over real big in training. But after he had pulled 75 off the ridge and saved them, they were getting ready to go up and take it again. And now again, this could be cinematic license being taken. But the captain talked to him, said, we're going to go, and I know it's your Sabbath. But he said, all the rest of them, they don't believe what you believe, but they believe in you. You know, can you go? And so they get to the ridge, and he's praying. And somebody calls into the captain and said, you're supposed to be starting your assault like 10 minutes ago. Where are you? He said, we're waiting on Private Doss. We'll go when he says to go. So again, I don't know if that happened or not, but it's a nice movie. It's a nice movie clip. So
They have a nursing home out here too.
yeah, yes,
Good Samaritan.
yep,
Name of it?
yep. So it hasn't. I think to their credit, you know, one danger here is a lot of people that predict the time, like this preacher, this hunting guy in Oakland. He told everybody to sell everything, and you know, people have a tendency to give it all up and go into seclusion and go into a cave and wait. Adventists have never done that. They are socially engaged. I mean, they were, for instance, abolition. I mean, think about that. They just felt like it was a stain, an extraordinary sin of this great nation of promise, the way they theologically processed it. And therefore, that'd be another reason you got to get rid of that for Jesus to be able to come back to this place that would be very important for the kingdom. Okay, this is good. So 1870s and 80s, what else did they do? Well, one thing, folks, that's interesting in 18th century American religion, they have a leader. It's hard to say she was like president or everything else, but she's one of the few females in the 1800s that had a position of extraordinary leadership. She's called a prophetess at one point, Ellen White. And I tell my students, if you're ever going to do a paper, a short paper on somebody, sociology, otherwise, Ellen White is a tremendous subject matter for sort of the leaders of one of the Seventh-day Adventist communities in the 1860s and 70s. And this is not doing her justice, but she was real big on health. She's big on, some people say she was a early women's liberation. That's a little too broad. It's a little too vibrant. But I love this. She absolutely condemned what she referred to as tight garments on women, 1870s. And she was talking about corsets and girdles. And she said, you are out of your mind if you wear that nonsense. I mean, she was ferocious about it because she said it restricted breathing, blood flow. It was not healthy. And that did put her way ahead of her time. And that's also why people think she's a liberation kind of person, but that's a little bit of a stretch. Speaking of health, y'all, some of you know this story. You may not know you know this story, but you know this story. So Adventists moved into the Great Lakes, and one family up in Michigan, a big family, gets very interested in food, and I'll come back to food, I mean healthy food, God's food, etc. They do experiments. They actually run and own a sanatorium. And you all know I'm talking to a aware crowd here. It's a health spa. I think, you know, experiment with food, and after a while they determined that they had actually found God's perfect food. Perfect food. In fact, they even said they believed it was like manna. And the food was a cornflake. The family's name was Kellogg. The sanitarium was in Battle Creek, Michigan, of course. And there's another, here we go again, movie. Now, I don't recommend this because you got to love satire if you watch this thing. But The Road to Wellville is, the Kellogg Corporation hates this movie. Hates it. It's Harvey, Dr. Harvey, right, was like the medicinal founder, supposedly. He is, if he's anything like he was in the movie, he's wacky. I mean, just crazy. But they did all these health experiments on food, and corn, folks, think about it, cornflake, I mean, corn, press it, bake it, right? I mean, it's about as plain as you can get. What some people have said about their view about food is, if God made it a particular way, let the food do what food's supposed to do. And they go back to the Corinthians model, your body's a temple. So they don't, now, I always tell my students, I'm getting ready to tell you something here, they don't smoke, most of them don't drink alcohol. I always tell my students, you may have a neighbor, Seventh-day Adventist, who smokes like a chimney. You know, that's between them and their God. But what they teach is they don't smoke. They don't do anything that would harm the temple, in theory. And when it comes to food, they're very careful about the way food is processed, the way it's taken, the way it's prepared. And it's usually a basic kind of motif in terms of preparation. They don't do pork. Most don't do meat. Now, they're not vegan, but they are vegetarian. Most. Not all, most. And blah, blah, blah. Remember I mentioned San Fernando Valley? Y'all helped me come up with that. Y'all know Morningstar Farm? The frozen food section, veggie burgers, etc.
You mean fake meat?
Pardon?
Fake meat.
Fake meat. That's Adventist. And there are a few others. Loma Linda, California, also in that area. That's like a hotbed of Adventist thought and food structure, etc. Loma Linda, California. So Morningstar Farms, a few of these food producers come right out of the Adventist motif. Yeah.
I've got a question. What is behind several faiths that do not eat pork? Now, I know a pig is nasty, but a cow's not exactly as soon as it's spotless either. So what is, I mean, is it the habitat of the pig the main reason, or what?
You know, we don't know. It's certainly based on a clear scriptural edict, as you know. I mean, it's laid out in Leviticus like don't even mess with it. And it's you know, there's some weird. I mean, frankly, I don't know. I guess I can say this. You know, sending the demons into the 2,000 pigs, Jesus did, and the poor pigs were going over the cliff. if I make it to heaven, I'm gonna ask him about that. Of course, the old preacher jokes, this is the first time we ever had deviled ham. You've heard that many
I just
times.
wondered, all this talk about being an unclean animal, I think they're being
Yeah.
a cow.
Well, I think it's, again, it is very clear in Scripture, you're not supposed to eat it. I mean, they just say, don't mess with it, don't eat it, and everything else. And then here's the cloven hoof thing, something, did I get that right?
Cows have it.
But then cows have it, but then there's something about like multiple stomachs.
Chewing the cud.
There you go, and the chewing the cud, and all that comes into play.
When you're in Israel, they'll tell you, we don't know. They
Yeah.
don't know why they don't eat shellfish,
Yeah.
or why they don't eat pork, but they just said, but it was a law.
But
we
it was a
followed.
law, yeah, it was a
And
law.
there's theories that it was hard to preserve, and that it was, probably would carry salmonella, and that God did it for their own best
Well,
interest.
I've wondered if, way back in the day, somebody butchered a pig and they, you all know, there's nothing worse than bad pork. I mean, if something's gonna tear you up, pork will just flat,
It doesn't keep good.
no.
Pork tapeworm.
Yeah, and I've got a feeling some of these laws that came from God actually were somebody's interpretation of God's message, because many times when I'm sick, I'm heard from God.
Yeah. I got food poisoning from the hand at Claudia Sanders on Easter,
Oh.
Mother's Day, Easter.
Get
Oh.
over it.
She
Made you go.
Just said it.
Yeah.
I thought I was gonna die. But a lot of the laws, a lot of the kosher laws, they say, we don't know, but it's just the way, that's what we do.
Well, I'll tell you this is a terrible story, so I'll clean it up. But I went during the PhD program. I went up to the University of Chicago with somebody who was doing the university work there, and got to hear Martin Marty lecture. Sat in a class with Martin Marty, renowned American religious scholar. Went to lunch at one of their places, ham and Swiss sandwich, and 30 minutes later, I was not in good shape, and it lasted for about 7 hours,
Uh-huh.
and it was.
You
Yeah.
think you're gonna die.
Do you think you're going to
You
die?
pray to die.
Yeah.
What's the development around the anti-pork thing, related to the discovery of the Petrina worm?
I think so. Yeah, I think so, but I don't know that for sure. It became a symbol of. I'm a little bit with Tish. I mean, they are nasty. Of course, there are a lot of animals that are nasty that we eat. When you see them in their habitat. I mean, cows aren't the greatest thing in the world, but.
What about the chicken?
Chicken house.
Yeah, I mean,
My
it's,
grandmother
it,
said they used to go eat.
and in human history, I am always fascinated by, like, who's the first person that said, let's eat that? You know what I mean? I mean, there are some brave rascals. They get you hungry enough, you'll eat anything. I've heard that story, but I want to know, I mean, seriously, I've always said, who was the first person who looked at a pig and said, yeah, let's try it? I mean, I don't know.
It's a whole lot easier catching a dinosaur.
Good point. Good point. The T-Rex would eat you. Yeah. But no,
Supposed to be vegetarian.
there are some people who absolutely insist that herbivores is where we're supposed to be, or herbivores, I guess. Yeah.
So where do the Adventists stand now on the second coming? Someday in the future?
Just enthusiastic someday in the future. Yeah.
So they've really moved into the mainstream.
They really
pretty
have,
well.
emphasizing it more, I think. It's soon to happen. I've told you many times, when the witnesses came to the house, they also, of course, are very enthusiastic about the nearness, shall we say, of the establishment of the kingdom. And they always ask me, don't you think what's going on in blah, blah, blah is a sign of the end time, or a sign of the end, or God? And I usually said, no, not really. I think it's just some bad actors over there doing some crazy stuff. Adventists, I think, have a tendency maybe to oversee some things a little bit in their enthusiasm for the second coming. But they're more mainstream, certainly. They still want to teach about it. They still want to try to interpret certain aspects of what's there. They don't talk about Armageddon near as much as the witnesses do, but they do talk about Armageddon.
Is this guy on TV? Is he a Seventh-day Adventist?
Which one?
I don't know, he's on Sunday mornings early, something about what's the name of the show? He lived in a cave for a while out in California.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Y'all never
I
seen
don't know
it?
that one.
Check him out. Well, I was gonna say, in the context, folks, of this prediction business and this millennial business, just, I mean, there's a bunch of stories. I'll try not to hurt you too bad with these, but there was a well-known Pentecostal evangelist named Jack Van Impe.
Yeah.
Remember Van Impe?
Yeah.
And Van Impe, and the reason I tell my students is we all get excited on the human calendar about the 1,000-year and 2,000-year, 2,000. Like you said, they were stuck with sort of that 6,000 thing, a little dispensational action going on. The year 1,000, supposedly, there was some fervor. Like 30 years either way of the 1,000, there was some fervor in the Middle Ages about this is it. So this whole 2,000 time has been a hot thing. Let me explain Van Impe. Fascinating. Van Impe's a wild man when it comes to this. Talk about man. Y'all have, I don't know where the scripture is, but there's a scripture that a generation shall not pass after Israel's return. Or a generation shall not pass. Okay? Well, Van Impe interpreted Israel's return as 1948. The establishment of the nation state of Israel post World War II vis-a-vis United Nations. And he calculated that a biblical generation is 51 years. So he said 48 plus 51 was 99. Then he ratcheted back 7 years because 7 years of tribulation. So he was adamant it was 1992. That was his theory. As far as we know, that didn't happen. Every year, of course, the Mayan thing was hot for a lot of Christian evangelists who wanted to predict something because they said, see, it even got out to another culture. Even another culture was aware that God was going to wrap it up in 2012. It's just this hunting guy I told you about. It's just been one after another, after another, after another. You all know, you were here, the computer Y2K thing was somehow a symbol of God that somehow everything was going to blow up and destruct and implode and explode and everything else based on that second when it went to 2000.
So I have a comment.
And it fizzled. Thank you.
I have a question, I have a comment first,
Yeah.
just to say that Jack Van Impe is loved by the secular Zionists
Yes.
in Israel and hated by the Palestinians.
Yeah.
The Palestinian Christians, evangelical Christians, can't stand Jack Van Impe.
Yeah.
He has been very hard against the Palestinians. So all of these millennial movements, you talked about the Jehovah's Witness and the Millerites, and you of course add in the Utopians, New Harmony, and all these others. I remember when I was in Texas, a church in Dallas had decided the Lord was coming on a certain day,
Yeah.
and they really did sell everything and put on white robes and sat on the roofs of their houses.
Yeah.
And the media came and had the cameras on them all day. It happens all the time.
All the
So my question is, what is so appealing about these kinds of promises that will make people do? And even the People's Church, Jim Jones, was a millennial movement.
Well, the folks that laced up their Nikes to chase the comet, not Haley's comet, but whatever comet it was.
The Hale-Bopp comet,
Very good, yeah.
who put the purple pyramids on their chest
Yep.
and killed themselves.
Yep.
What is so appealing, maybe is not the word, is so driving about that urge, that it makes people do crazy things?
That's a great question. First answer is I'm not sure, but I've got, there's things I think y'all would experience as well. Now this may be pithy. I don't mean to put them down. I honest to goodness think that whatever kind of existence they experience later, they're going to be able to look at all the rest of us and say, we told you. I mean, I think it's a kind of unusual knowing that gets them to a kind of superior state at some point. More individually, I think some of these folks are profoundly lost in terms of who they are and their self-worth. And so why not join a group that gives me some unusual insight and power even later? Obviously, there's some that are deeply troubled that this earth is not a cakewalk for them, and they just want to escape.
This the guy?
Yeah.
Doug Batchelor. Why do I know that name? The richest caveman. Interesting.
Matthew 24:34,
Is which scripture?
shall not pass.
One generation shall not pass, or this generation shall not pass?
Verily I say unto you, this generation shall not pass until all things have been fulfilled.
Yeah, okay.
24, 22,
Two things
34.
to ask you.
Yeah,
Things like predictions been going on for years. Nostradamus.
yeah. Oh, good, yeah, yeah,
And Al Gore.
yeah.
Was he a Seventh-day Adventist because he hadn't hit the mark yet?
Yeah, no, Gore, I don't even, Gore,
Southern Baptist.
I think he's a Baptist, I believe.
Southern
Yeah.
Baptist. Was, I doubt he is now.
Yeah, that's a good question, yeah.
Matter.
Gore. And predictions are a good way to get noticed. I mean, you mentioned, we're still talking about Nostradamus. And what happens, I think you would agree, when somebody makes a prediction from 300 years ago and says something's going to happen, we can always look back. I sort of just like it. I actually read the horoscope every day. I told you that. I just get a kick out of the horoscope. It's right there by the comics. Leave me alone. I read the horoscope. And I'm always amazed at how many times the horoscope, especially if I read it at the end of the day, I could twist something and say, yeah, that sort of happened. That was pretty close, you know. And I think we do with Nostradamus a little bit. You know, didn't he said something about? Didn't he say something about 2 towers falling? One of his big predictions. That and of course everybody tied that into 9/11, of course, at the time.
And he
So-
talked about Hister.
Pardon?
He talked about his Hister,
Yep.
which people think is Hitler.
Hitler. Yep. Yeah.
Jim, in response to Colin's question,
Uh huh.
is it really a modern form of Gnosticism?
Well, I think so, and the whole knowledge thing. I mean, it just never goes away. People love to be part of the group that has profound, extraordinary knowledge, and I think the witnesses fall in that category. I certainly think the Mormons do. The Mormons will. And this is not trashing folks. They will nice you to death. I'm not sure many of you follow South Park in here, the show South Park. The South Park came out of some Mormon renegades, the whole shooting match. And they have a couple episodes where the Mormon family is just so nice, it's so hard to argue with. You know, I mean, they're just so nice. They just nice all over you. And that's what the South Park people say. They're just so nice. And it's okay, it's nice, and y'all believe this, that's fine. But it's also a kind of weird superiority. You know, we again, it's in many religions where we've got it and you don't. You know, we have the knowledge and you don't. And mystery. People love to solve mysteries. And this is one of the great mysteries. I mean, if there are many people who have said at different times about Jesus coming back, it's almost, what are you waiting for? I mean, I mean that, I'm not trashing Jesus there. I'm just saying their response would be, well, if not now, when? You know, why not? Y'all know, some of you don't know this, I mean, but you've read like the Antichrist thing when you tie that in. Who's the Antichrist? Who is this person? Well, Hitler was, I mean, there's never been anyone, I don't think, other than, what more could you ask for in an Antichrist than this guy?
Well, Stalin was the same way.
Stalin's the same way.
Pol Pot.
You know, it just never goes away. And so many people get so excited about a variety of things that the Adventists are a little bit responsible for this due back to knowledge. And things get goofy. I may have told you this in another story. I love this story. So I was talking about this whole millennial thing and end time and prediction. And the guy at one point talked about Armageddon and, of course, 666, of course, which is fascinating. The Omen in 1975, and then they remade The Omen about 10 years ago. I don't know if you remember this or not. They remade it word for word, and they brought it out on June 6, 2006. 666, of course. Thought that was a great marketing move, I guess. Well, I brought in a brochure. I don't know, I think I've misplaced this, and it's tragic if I have, but a brochure that somebody had found for me. I got a book in here. Is there a book anywhere? Never mind. Barcode, you know the barcode, the ubiquitous barcodes on everything, right? Well, this pamphlet insisted that the barcode was the sign of the beast. Okay?
I've read that.
And I don't know if this is true or not, I might have to depend on, some people have much more technological awareness, but supposedly, this brochure indicated that the first barcodes, all of them, were framed in 3/6. Begin, middle, end. Doesn't matter what number's there, but you had a 666. So you had that going on. And, of course, y'all remember this, the first supercomputer, Brussels. Do I remember this right? I mean, the first massive, 18-room kind of supercomputer, Brussels, called the Beast. Okay? And people were saying they're going to make you put your barcode on your wrist. And the brochure had a picture of a person with a barcode right here on their forehead, which I really got a kick out of. I thought that was pretty cool. Barcode right across their forehead. And so I'm spouting this off. This is 22 years ago, probably. And a student in the back, young female, she was going like this. And then she started, oh my God. So after a while I said, what's up? She said, I work at Kroger. And I think it was Middletown, Kroger. Because this was Shelby campus class when they still had Shelby. She said, I work at Kroger. And I said, oh, okay. She said, we have 4 families that won't let us scan their groceries. And they say that that's the mark of the beast. And so they have to, they made them literally every item punch in the product code number. Now, to me, that would be the same thing, especially if there are 3 6s in there. But they said no. They said the scanning technology, in their understanding, was capitulating to the beast, to the Antichrist, or the forces of evil. And so you don't let anybody scan your groceries. That's how seriously they took it.
If I could be a little mercenary
Yeah.
to say that this end time stuff is also a big business.
Yeah. Oh,
There's big money involved.
Yeah.
So, folks will bring me books about, 5 or 6 years ago, it was the red heifer.
yeah.
A perfect red heifer had been born in
Yep.
Jerusalem, and
Yep.
it was a sign. And this past year, it was the blood moon.
Blood moon.
Blood moon, and you read on the cover, these are big names. Tim LaHaye will write an endorsement of these blood moon books,
Remember the Bible code? Remember that book, the Bible
Oh,
code?
yeah, and it was all these weird things, and
And
this stuff is just really attractive
Yeah.
and alluring to know, if I could just know. But it's also, for the preachers, it is big money.
Big
For
money.
at least a period, you get on every TV show,
Yeah.
you fill arenas, you're collecting, and there's a mercenary side to it, that if you can make it big, that is one way to make it big.
yeah,
Dr. David Jeremiah just wrote a book, What in the World's Going On?
yeah,
There's a chapter in there on the Antichrist and all the signs of the times.
yeah.
Big money.
It is big. It's big money. It is, and it's powerfully influential.
And
if
it's
you can-
fear, it's playing on fear.
It's playing on fear, and it's back to the mystery thing, and I've got the answer and you don't, and so join me, send me on the Sunday morning. It's your faithfulness and standing with us that make these
Yeah.
It's
televisions.
interesting,
Yeah.
it's interesting, many of these preacher types, they come out with their own Bible that has footnotes that undergird their.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And they sell those things like crazy.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Is this soul sleep that you mentioned, is that equivalent to maybe purgatory?
It's close. It's close because they don't really describe where you are during soul sleep. I have had one Adventist person say it's like suspended animation. Literally use those 2 words, suspended animation. That you're just waiting. You're just in this great waiting place, and maybe not awake or aware of anything. You don't have to pay your way out. You're just waiting for what they consider to be the ultimate judgment.
This guy that I was talking to, I watched him, and he just said, when you die, you're asleep,
Yeah.
period. You're just asleep. And nothing happens until
I've been If he said that, I bet he is. I bet he is right in that line then with Adventist thought.
Yeah, and I saw him
Bachelor?
within the last month,
Bachelor.
and he does not believe in hell.
That's, he got it.
And because he said that what happens is that when you're sent to hell after a period of time, you're just simply consumed,
Right. Yeah.
and there's nothing left.
Same thing happens if you go to Lexington.
There you go.
Wait a minute. Okay. Get her out. Get her out quickly.
Well, I can't.
No. But you know, we didn't mention these folks. I guess I should say this, especially with you sitting here. Some of you know this. The worst PR the Seventh-day Adventist community got in the last 50 years is the Branch Davidians.
Yeah.
When the Waco story broke, people started doing their, we'll call it cursory background work. And they literally were talking about the Branch Davidians being a portion, a part, a group that was still somewhat affiliated with the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Now, folks, the Davidians broke away in 1934, I think. Very small. And they've been minding their own business. You know that in Waco. They've been minding their own business, primarily where they were.
Yeah, nobody knew they were.
Nobody knew who they were. Nobody cared. And then
Only
Koresh,
rattlesnakes out there who they were.
exactly. Then Koresh comes along and turns it into the monstrosity that he made it, being a monster. And then they were doing this work and saying they were tied into the Seventh-day Adventist. And nothing could be further. Nothing could be further from the truth. Because they'd completely broken away.
Does everybody know this except me? I just found it out recently. I was reading Jim Jones. He made millions and millions and millions of dollars. He got all those people's money to follow him. It was money, money, money for him.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Well, yeah, I mean, but that's.
And drugs.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, somewhere.
I want to say one other thing. I had a college theology professor who used to say, you tell me somebody's definition of heaven, and I'll tell you what they need most in life. That we tend to be drawn toward theology that fills our needs.
Yeah.
And if I am feeling powerless and looked over by the world, I'm drawn to religious figures that make me feel empowered.
Yeah.
And if I have nothing here, I'm drawn toward the promise of a home in heaven, in glory. You know the old gospel song, just build my mansion next door to Jesus.
Yeah.
And, but I think there's a whole lot of truth in that we tend to find religious movements that fit a personal need. Not all of us, certainly not. The vast majority of us not. But some folks are drawn into these really kind of bizarre side elements out of a sense of, they talked to me, they were nice to me, I found friends.
Can't you boil what you just said down to basically two things? People go to a church either to be educated or to be made feel they feel good when they leave.
So when I talk to the staff, they'll tell you this, they hear this probably too much. People are not looking for a friendly church. They're looking for a church where they can have friends. We go to church because we have a need. We want to, if I go to a church, I want to know that I have friends there,
Yeah.
that I will enjoy.
I don't go there just for that. I go there for an uplifting experience.
That's right, and friends.
You're old enough to know better.
And
It's
I
kind of
think
an
that people feel
exegesis,
good by watching these people on TV because
Yeah.
they make you feel good.
Absolutely.
They'll send you their prayer clause.
I'm just kind of, we take it as exegesis or eisegesis.
Yeah, absolutely. And I look back to the TV thing, the great, there was always, you can imagine the 70s and 80s. And folks, full disclosure, remember, I went to Oral Roberts University. Always keep that in mind when you hear me talk about TV evangelists or anything else.
So you gonna do your oral impersonation?
I don't do oral real well.
Oh.
I do a couple others pretty
All right.
well, but that's another time probably. But people always, this great mystery about why were they successful? why the success? How in the world could people not see through this? And you know this, that they're about as only as successful as many churches have been in failing the people that watch these shows. And what I mean by that, you nailed it. This evangelist looks out from the TV, and every once in a while, you know, they'll really tug on the heartstrings. What are they doing with that money? Well, we're building a hospital. We're helping an orphanage. We're helping here, we're feeding this. It's always good work. And the person that is homebound, or largely homebound, that is not picking up on a lot of friends, the human interaction, they know that every week, every day, whatever the case may be, this was the theory, that like clockwork, they could always turn on that show for an hour, 30 minutes, whatever, and that person was going to look at them and say, you matter to the kingdom of God. You are part of this great work. I cannot do this work without you. Does that make sense? And of course, that means write a check. I mean, let's don't play around. Let's write a check. But I cannot do this without you. I need you to do this, and I love you. And what else? Well, all this stuff they send. Every 3 weeks, folks, they send stuff. And we go, man, that's junk. It wasn't junk to the person who got it in the mail every day after those 3 weeks. Somebody was sending them something. Marketing, brilliant marketing. You know, this. They got you. All right, I see people, 8 o'clock.
8 o'clock.
Thank y'all.
We got one more night.